Do you remember the name Elian Gonzalez? Well, he was a little boy back in 1999 when his mother put him in some type of makeshift raft and tried to make it from Cuba to America. She died in the process. He was rescued at sea, and that set off a battle, a legal battle, a political battle. Ultimately, they had to send in marshals to take him from his relatives in Miami and bring him back to Cuba. ABC News correspondent Jim Avila caught up with Elian Gonzalez all these many years later. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning.
How did you get the interview with Elian Gonzalez?
Well, there were a couple of factors. First of all, in December, of course, the President of the United States and the President of Cuba announced a new era of relations between the two countries. So I figured, first of all, that there might be some openness to this. The Cuban government had been shielding him from the American media especially ever since the incident that you mentioned back in 1999. The second event was that in December he also coincidentally turned 21. So we figured he was an adult now, perhaps he would be willing to talk. So we made inquiries to our sources. I've been working on stories in Cuba for about 25 years, so I have a lot of sources there, and found a cameraman who works with him regularly first for Castro before he retired. He worked with him, and so I made inquiries with him, and we made contact, and he said, okay, cool, as long as the cameraman, Roberto Chile, shoots it, because I trust him, and so that's what we did.
Now, he's 21 years old, as you said. What does he remember from way back when?
Well, as you said, he was 5 years old when it happened, and his mother gave him Dramamine or sleeping pills before the trip, so he said he was asleep most of the time. But what he remembers is he remembers being given those pills, remembers launching a little bit up in a little 16-foot fishing boat is what they went in, and they tied the inner tubes behind it in case there was a problem. And there was a problem, and the boat flipped, and he remembers the boat flipping and him going in the water. He remembers his mother getting one of those inner tubes and putting him on the inner tube, and her hanging onto the inner tube, and then he fell asleep again from the pills. When he woke up, his mother was not there, and he was floating alone, and then he drifted back, and that was the last thing he remembered until he was in the hospital.
Now, this report aired on ABC, and I guess we can see more of it at abcnews.com. Is that right?
Yes, and it'll be on Nightline. We believe it'll be on Nightline tomorrow night is a scheduled night. Tomorrow night, okay. In longer form.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does he talk to any of his Miami relatives?
We reached out to the Miami relatives. They did not want to talk, and what's interesting, because the reason we reached out is Elian in our interview said, he wants to come to the United States. He wants to thank the marshals who are in that dramatic picture, as you mentioned, when the gun is pointed at him. He wants to thank them. And he's also willing to meet with his Miami relatives, who he says treated him well when he was in the United States. But he said they need to apologize to his father first for trying to keep him away from his father. And until they do that, he won't meet with them.
What was so interesting about that time, and it sort of enveloped into a political scandal. People upset with the Clinton administration. It became left versus right, conservative versus liberal. And I've often made the point that so many conservatives don't want illegal immigrants coming in this country, and they want to kick them all out. However, they wanted to keep Elian Gonzalez in the country.
Right, and there's like 6 things you mentioned. First of all, Cubans have a special status in the United States, which is different than any other immigrant. So that sort of absolves them of that. As soon as they touch ground in the United States, they're not here illegally. It's called the dry-foot policy, wet-foot, dry-foot policy. Elian's case, normally, if you're picked up at sea by the Coast Guard or anybody else, they will ship you back to Cuba. But because he was sick and he was brought to a hospital, he was allowed to stay because he touched ground in the United States. But you're right, it set up this incredible political furor, but really what it boiled down to, was a domestic case. His mother died. His father, who had custody of him, was still in Cuba. The law ruled that he had to go back to his father. And most people in the United States agreed with that decision even then, and certainly now they really agree with that decision. But it became a political furor because, of course, Cuba's a communist island.
They were also worried, and they were going to say that Cuba and the communist regime in Cuba was going to use him as a propaganda tool. Did they end up doing that?
Well, it depends on your definition, all right? Did Fidel Castro didn't meet him at the airport when he came back because he was afraid that the child would start screaming. He didn't know what the Miami family had told him about this guy Castro, and he was afraid that there would be a big scene. So Castro stayed away. He did meet him later, and you'll see that video on Nightline. He met him privately, and Roberto Chile, the photographer, took pictures of that, and we're going to reveal that for the first time. And through the years, Fidel Castro has gone to his school, has attended birthday parties, and calls in Avila for his birthday. So they are friends, and he has appeared at a couple of national events, and he is an icon in Cuba. But he's really, for the most part, left alone. While Cubans feel that he's a symbol of independence, he's a symbol of the small island standing up to the United States on this custody issue, they don't really bother him about it. He just is revered.
Yeah.
What is his life like now? What is he doing?
So he lives in the same town where he lived before he was brought to the United States. He lives in a small town called Cardenas, about 100 miles outside of Havana. It's a pretty rundown town with cobblestone torn-up streets, mostly very few cars, mostly transportation by bicycle and horse-drawn carriage. Even in this time in the world, he lives in a simple house with his father, with his stepmother, and 3 half-brothers. Elian seems happy. He seems polite, well-adjusted. I asked him, in the United States, you're 21, you might have a car, you might live on your own, you probably would be living better. And he said he didn't care about those monetary things. He lives well. The people in Cuba love him. He's with his family. He wants to visit the United States, but he wants to stay in Cuba.
Jim Avila has gotten the interview with Elian Gonzalez, a 21-year-old Elian Gonzalez, tomorrow night on Nightline, and then, of course, more on abcnews.com, correct?
That's right. Thank you very much.
Jim, thank you very much, and thanks for spending a couple minutes with us in a very busy time for you. Thank you. Jim Avila with us from New York. Tomorrow night on Nightline, he sits down with Elian Gonzalez. Extraordinary story for a 5-year-old to be lost at sea. It is 9 o'clock. KTRS, St. Louis.